Part 1: The First Encounter. Lana adjusted the camera strap on her shoulder, her fingers brushing over the cool metal body of her DSLR, its weight familiar and comforting. The gallery buzzed with the soft murmur of chatter, champagne glasses clinking, and the occasional flash of a photographer's bulb. It was an upscale event, expensive art, wealth dripping from the walls, and the scent of luxury filling the air. She had been to dozens of these events in her career as a photographer, hired to capture moments that would grace the pages of fashion magazines or high society blogs. But tonight felt different. Maybe it was the unusually heavy atmosphere, or maybe it was the tension building in her chest that she couldn't quite shake. Her gaze drifted through the room, sweeping across the crowd of polished faces and tailored suits. She was here to do a job, nothing more. Keep your head down, get the shots, and leave, she reminded herself. That had always been her approach, simple, professional, detached. Lana wasn't one for letting people in, not since him. Her heart gave a tiny flutter as her mind wandered to memories she didn't want to revisit. She focused instead on the task at hand, lifting her camera to capture a couple posing by an abstract painting. The flash bounced off the golden frame, and she stepped back, satisfied with the shot. Just a few more, and then she could disappear into the night like a shadow. As she moved to get a different angle of the gallery, her attention was drawn to a figure standing in the corner. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled out a charcoal gray suit. His back was to her, but there was something magnetic about the way he stood, the way he seemed utterly calm amidst the chaos of the room. Lana's camera lifted almost involuntarily, her lens zooming in to frame the stranger. She snapped a photo, the soft click of the shutter masked by the noise around her. Just as she lowered her camera, he turned. Her breath caught in her throat. Dark eyes, intense and unwavering, locked onto hers from across the room. His face was strong, angular, with a day's worth of stubble tracing the sharp line of his jaw. His lips, pressed into a neutral expression, hinted at something unreadable beneath the surface. And yet, it was his gaze that held her captive. Those eyes seemed to see right through her, as though he already knew all her secrets. Lana's heart pounded. She wasn't used to being on this side of the lens, being the one watched, scrutinized. Instinctively, she lowered her camera, hoping to break the connection. But it was too late. He was already moving toward her. Her pulse quickened as he crossed the room with confident strides, each step deliberate and steady. He stopped just a few feet in front of her, his presence overwhelming. The hum of the gallery seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the sound of her own shallow breaths. "Are you taking photos of me?" he asked, his voice low, smooth, with an edge of amusement. His gaze flickered briefly to the camera hanging from her neck. Lana swallowed hard. She had photographed plenty of strangers in her life, but none of them had ever confronted her like this. She was a professional, she didn't make mistakes like this. Why had she focused on him? "Hi," she started, her voice coming out more unsteady than she'd intended. "I was just capturing the moment." He raised an eyebrow, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "The moment, huh?" Lana felt a rush of warmth flood her cheeks. She quickly averted her gaze, pretending to fiddle with her camera settings. "Look, I didn't mean to. It's fine," he interrupted, his tone softening. "I'm not upset. Just curious." His eyes lingered on her, as though he were trying to figure something out, but wasn't in a hurry to do so. Lana dared to meet his gaze again, only to find herself trapped in the intensity of those dark eyes. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at her, as though he could see past the layers she'd carefully constructed around herself. He didn't seem like the type who attended art galleries, she thought. He seemed too raw, too visceral, to fit in with the sterile elegance of the place. And yet, here he was, blending seamlessly into the crowd despite standing out so starkly to her. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked, his voice drawing her back into the present. "What makes you say that?" Lana countered, her natural defensiveness flaring up. She wasn't sure why, but something about this man made her feel vulnerable, and she didn't like it. His smile widened slightly, a knowing glint in his eyes. "You don't seem like the type who enjoys mingling at events like this. You've been on edge since you walked in." She blinked, surprised at how easily he'd read her. Her walls had never felt so thin. She wasn't used to people paying attention to her, not like this. Normally, she was the one observing, the one hidden behind her lens. "And you?" she asked, crossing her arms in an attempt to regain some control. "You don't exactly seem like the type to appreciate modern art." He chuckled, a low, rich sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "You're right. I'm not." "Then why are you here?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "For the same reason you are," he replied smoothly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Work." Lana raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite herself. "What kind of work?" "Let's just say." "I'm not the one taking pictures," he said cryptically, the smile never leaving his lips. Her curiosity piqued, Lana studied him for a moment longer. He wasn't giving much away, but there was something about him that stirred something deep within her. Something that made her want to know more, even if every instinct screamed at her to keep her distance. "I'm Gabriel, by the way," he said, offering his hand. Lana hesitated for a brief moment before taking it. His hand was warm, his grip firm, but not overpowering. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin, sending a jolt of awareness through her body. "Lana," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lana," he repeated, as though tasting the sound of her name on his lips. "Nice to meet you." Before she could respond, the lights in the gallery dimmed, signaling the start of the main event, a showcase of the gallery's newest collection. The buzz of conversation died down as the crowd shifted their attention to the front of the room. Lana took the opportunity to slip away from Gabriel's intense gaze, retreating to her usual role behind the lens. But even as she snapped photos of the art and the attendees, she couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes were still on her. She didn't look back to confirm it. She didn't need to. Because something told her that this wouldn't be the last time she crossed paths with Gabriel. And that thought both thrilled and terrified her. Part 2: Unspoken Connections. Lana moved through the rest of the night on autopilot. Her camera flashed, her fingers expertly adjusting settings, her feet gliding through the crowd like she'd done at so many events before. But her mind wasn't on the job. Not really. It was on him. Gabriel. His eyes, his voice, the way he'd seen through her so easily. She had met countless people during her career, from celebrities to CEOs, but no one had ever made her feel so exposed. It was as if he had peeled back the layers she'd spent years constructing with nothing more than a glance. And she didn't know how to feel about it. The gallery event was winding down now. The crowd thinned, art enthusiasts trickling out of the venue, leaving behind an air of contentment. Lana exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. Another job done. She could go home, download the photos, edit them in the quiet of her apartment, and forget this strange encounter ever happened. But as she packed away her camera, the hair on the back of her neck stood on end. A familiar heat washed over her, and she knew, without turning around, that he was still there. Watching her. Lana swallowed, her fingers tightening around the strap of her camera bag. She could leave. Walk out the door, catch a cab, and be safe in her world of solitude. Or she could turn around and confront whatever this was, whatever Gabriel seemed to ignite inside her. She hesitated, her mind warring with itself. Before she could decide, his voice broke through the silence. Leaving already? Lana's breath hitched, her heart jumping in her chest. She turned slowly, and there he was, Gabriel, standing a few feet away, his hands casually tucked into the pockets of his suit pants, his gaze fixed on her. "Work's done," she replied, her voice steady, though her pulse raced beneath the surface. He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that sent a ripple of warmth through her body. "Work might be done, but the night doesn't have to be." Lana raised an eyebrow, unsure if he was teasing or serious. She didn't have time for games. Not with him. "And what exactly are you suggesting?" Gabriel stepped closer, his presence as overwhelming as it had been earlier in the evening. His dark eyes glinted with something she couldn't quite place, challenge, perhaps. Or desire. Maybe both. "A drink," he said, his voice low, smooth. "Just one. You look like you could use it after tonight." Lana's lips parted, a retort on the tip of her tongue, but the words didn't come. Instead, she found herself hesitating again. She wasn't the type to go out with strangers, let alone ones who stirred something so deep and unpredictable within her. But there was something about Gabriel, something that made her want to throw caution to the wind. Just one drink, she told herself. It wouldn't hurt. Right? "Fine," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "One drink." Gabriel's smile widened, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. He gestured toward the door. "Shall we?" They left the gallery together, the cool night air brushing against Lana's skin as they stepped out onto the bustling city street. It was late, but the city was still alive, neon lights reflecting off the wet pavement, casting the world in a soft, ethereal glow. Gabriel led her down the street to a small bar tucked away between towering buildings. It wasn't the kind of place she'd expect someone like him to frequent. No pretense, no frills, just a cozy atmosphere and the soft hum of conversation. They slipped inside, the warmth of the bar wrapping around them as they found a booth in the corner. Gabriel ordered whiskey for himself, while Lana opted for a glass of wine. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it was charged, as though both were waiting for the other to make the first move. Lana studied him across the table, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "So, what do you really do?" she asked, cutting straight to the point. "You never answered me earlier." Gabriel chuckled, taking a slow sip of his whiskey before setting the glass down. "I didn't think you'd let that go." "I'm not a fan of mysteries," she replied, raising an eyebrow. He leaned back in his seat, his eyes never leaving hers. "I work in acquisitions." Lana frowned, confused. "Acquisitions? As in?" I find things people want. And I get them, he explained, his tone casual, though there was an edge to his words that made her think there was more to it than he was letting on. What kind of things? His lips curved into a half-smile. That depends on the client. She narrowed her eyes, trying to piece together the puzzle that was Gabriel. That's a vague answer. That's because it's a vague business, he said, lifting his glass once more. But enough about me. What about you, Lana? Why photography? Lana blinked, surprised by the sudden shift in focus. Most people didn't ask her about her work, not like this. Not with genuine curiosity. But there was something about the way he asked, the way he leaned forward just slightly, as if he actually wanted to know. It's what I'm good at, she said simply, shrugging. He tilted his head, watching her closely. Is that all? Lana hesitated. It was easy to give the standard answers, the ones that kept people at arm's length. But Gabriel wasn't like most people. He had a way of cutting through the surface, of asking the questions no one else would. I like capturing moments, she admitted, her voice softer now. Things people don't see. The in-between. The details. Like the way you captured me? He asked, his smile teasing. She rolled her eyes, but a small smile tugged at her lips. You were standing in the corner, staring at the crowd like you were plotting something. It was hard not to notice. Gabriel laughed, a deep, rich sound that made her chest tighten. Maybe I was plotting something. Lana's pulse quickened at his words, though she wasn't sure why. There was something about Gabriel that made her feel like she was on the edge of something dangerous. Something thrilling. They spent the next hour talking, their conversation flowing easily despite the tension simmering beneath the surface. Gabriel was charming, intelligent, and annoyingly mysterious. He revealed just enough to keep her intrigued, but not enough to give her any real answers. And yet, Lana found herself enjoying his company more than she'd expected. The bar began to empty as the night grew later, the lights dimming and the music softening into a quiet hum. Lana glanced at her watch, realizing just how late it had gotten. I should go, she said, though the words felt reluctant on her tongue. Gabriel's eyes flicked to her watch before settling back on her face. Let me walk you home. Lana opened her mouth to protest, but something in his gaze stopped her. There was no pressure, no insistence. Just a quiet offer. And against her better judgment, she nodded. All right. They left the bar together, stepping back into the cool night. The streets were quieter now, the city winding down. They walked in silence for a few blocks, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the stillness. Lana wasn't sure what it was about Gabriel that drew her in, but there was no denying it. He had a way of making her feel like the world around them faded into the background, leaving only the two of them. When they reached her apartment building, Lana turned to face him, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure what she was expecting. Goodbye, maybe. Or something more. Gabriel stood close, his dark eyes searching hers, the space between them charged with an unspoken tension. His gaze flickered to her lips for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough to send a shiver through her body. He didn't move, didn't push. He was waiting. And in that moment, Lana realized that for the first time in a long time, she wanted something more. Without thinking, she took a step closer, her breath catching as the heat of his body brushed against hers. She could feel the electricity in the air between them, the pull that had been there since the moment they'd met. And then, in the stillness of the night, Lana leaned in. Gabriel's hand found her waist, his fingers curling gently around her, pulling her closer. His lips hovered just above hers, his breath warm against her skin. But he didn't kiss her. Not yet. Instead, he whispered against her lips, his voice a low, heated murmur. "Are you sure?" Lana's heart raced, her pulse pounding in her ears. She knew this was dangerous. Knew that once she crossed this line, there would be no going back. But in that moment, she didn't care. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes." Part 3. The Heat of Desire. Lana's mind raced as Gabriel's lips brushed against hers, the contact so light it was almost a tease. Her body responded before she could think, a sharp thrill running through her veins, igniting every inch of her. His hand on her waist tightened slightly, drawing her closer, and suddenly, the world around them disappeared. All that was left was the heat of his touch. The kiss was slow at first, gentle, exploratory. It wasn't rushed or hurried, it was as though he was savoring every second, every breath, every beat of her heart. And for the first time in a long time, Lana let herself get lost in it. She let the walls she'd built around herself crumble, even if just for this moment. Gabriel's lips moved against hers with a quiet intensity, and she responded in kind, her hands finding their way to the lapels of his jacket, gripping them lightly as if to steady herself. The tension that had been building between them since they first met finally unraveled, and it was electric. He tasted of whiskey and something else, something darker, something that made her stomach flutter with a mix of excitement and danger. Her thoughts spun, and for a moment, she forgot everything, forgot the reason she kept her distance, forgot the rule she'd set for herself. But as the kiss deepened, a flicker of doubt surfaced in the back of her mind. What was she doing? She had just met this man, barely knew anything about him. This wasn't like her. She didn't dive headfirst into things, especially not with someone as enigmatic as Gabriel. But then his hand slid from her waist to the small of her back, pressing her closer, and the doubt melted away. Lana didn't want to think. She didn't want to second guess. She just wanted to feel, to let go, to be swept up in this moment that felt so raw and real. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing heavily, their foreheads resting against each other. The cool night air did little to cool the heat between them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of the city, the occasional car passing by on the empty street. Lana's heart pounded in her chest, her thoughts racing to catch up with the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. "I should go," Gabriel said softly, his voice rough and low. Lana blinked, her mind struggling to process his words. "What?" "I should go," he repeated, though his hand lingered on her waist as if he didn't want to leave any more than she wanted him to. Lana's pulse quickened again, her body still humming from the kiss. "You don't have to." He looked down at her, his eyes dark and intense. "I do." She could see the conflict in his gaze, the way he seemed to be wrestling with something she couldn't quite understand. It wasn't just about the kiss, she realized. There was something deeper going on here, something he wasn't telling her. But before she could ask, Gabriel pulled back, stepping out of the intimate bubble they'd created. "I'll see you again, Lana," he said, his voice filled with quiet promise. And then, without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. Lana stood there for a long moment, her heart still racing, her mind buzzing with confusion and longing. She wanted to run after him, to ask him what the hell was going on, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the way he'd said her name, the way he'd looked at her as if he was holding back something powerful. Or maybe it was the way her own heart had skipped a beat when he kissed her. Shaking her head, she turned and headed inside her building, her mind still replaying the events of the night. The kiss. The heat between them. The way he'd walked away as if he had no choice. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, Lana felt a strange sense of anticipation building inside her. She had no idea when or how, but she knew one thing for certain: this wasn't over. A week later, the gallery photos had been processed, edited, and sent off to her client, yet Lana still couldn't shake the lingering thoughts of Gabriel. It was maddening. Every time she tried to focus on her work, her mind wandered back to that night. To his kiss, his touch, the intensity in his eyes. She hadn't seen or heard from him since, and part of her wondered if she ever would. Maybe that night had been a fluke. Maybe it was just a moment of temporary insanity, an impulsive decision that had no future. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. As the days passed, Lana found herself looking over her shoulder more often, scanning the crowds for any sign of him. But he never appeared. And then, just when she was beginning to think she'd imagined the entire thing, she received a text. "Meet me at the warehouse on 5th, tonight. 9 p.m. Gabriel." Lana stared at her phone, her heart skipping a beat. The warehouse on 5th. That was in an old industrial part of town, far from the glitz and glamour of the gallery scene. It was a place she wouldn't normally visit, especially not at night. But something about the message, about Gabriel, compelled her to go. It wasn't just curiosity. It was something deeper. Something primal. She couldn't explain it, but she knew she had to see him again. That night, Lana dressed simply: jeans, a black leather jacket, and boots. Nothing fancy, nothing that would draw attention. She wasn't sure what to expect, but the adrenaline coursing through her veins made it clear that this wasn't going to be a casual meeting. The streets were quiet as she approached the warehouse district. Most of the buildings were old and abandoned, their windows boarded up, graffiti covering the walls. It was eerie, but Lana didn't feel fear. Not exactly. It was more like a heightened awareness, a sense that something significant was about to happen. When she reached the warehouse Gabriel had mentioned, she hesitated for a moment. The building loomed before her, its dark silhouette cutting against the night sky. A single light flickered above the entrance, casting long shadows across the pavement. Taking a deep breath, Lana pushed open the door. Inside, the warehouse was cavernous, the high ceilings and empty space giving it an almost surreal quality. The air was thick with dust and the faint smell of rusted metal. And there, standing in the center of the room, was Gabriel. He looked different tonight, more dangerous, more untamed. His suit was gone, replaced by dark jeans and a leather jacket that only accentuated the raw intensity she'd felt from him before. His eyes locked onto hers as soon as she stepped inside, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, without a word, Gabriel crossed the distance between them, his movements slow and deliberate. When he reached her, he stopped just inches away, his gaze burning into hers. "You came," he said softly, his voice low and rough. Lana swallowed hard, her pulse racing. "I had to." His lips twitched into a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. There was something darker in his expression tonight, something that sent a thrill of both excitement and unease through her. "I told you," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "This isn't over." Before she could respond, Gabriel reached out, his hand sliding around the back of her neck, pulling her closer. His touch was firm, possessive, and when his lips crashed against hers, it was like a dam breaking. The slow, tentative kiss from before was gone, replaced by raw hunger and need. Lana's body responded instantly, her hands gripping his jacket as she kissed him back with equal fervor. There was no hesitation this time, no doubt. She wanted this. She wanted him. And from the way his body pressed against hers, the way his kiss deepened, she knew he felt the same. The intensity of the moment consumed them both, the quiet of the warehouse broken only by the sound of their breaths and the muffled rustle of clothing. Gabriel's hands roamed over her body with a confidence that sent shivers down her spine, and when his lips left hers to trail down her neck, Lana let out a soft gasp, her fingers tangling in his hair. But even as the heat between them grew, there was a voice in the back of her mind, a whisper of warning. This was moving fast, too fast. And yet, she couldn't stop. She didn't want to stop. When Gabriel pulled back, his eyes were darker than she'd ever seen them, his breath ragged. "Are you sure?" he asked, echoing the question he'd asked that night outside her apartment. Lana's heart pounded in her chest, her body alive with anticipation. She knew what he was asking. She knew the stakes. And this time, her answer was immediate. Yes. Part 4, Secrets Unraveled. The word yes lingered in the air like a whispered secret, and the moment stretched between them. Gabriel's grip on her tightened slightly, his breath still warm against her skin. His lips hovered just above hers, a silent promise of what was to come. But instead of diving back into the kiss, he pulled away slowly, his dark eyes searching hers. "Good," he whispered, his voice low and rough, the sound sending another shiver down her spine. For a second, Lana wondered why he had pulled back. She was still caught in the heat of the moment, her body humming with the electric connection between them. But then Gabriel's hand slid down her arm, fingers brushing over her skin with a delicate touch, almost as if he was grounding her in this moment. The tension shifted, no longer just about the physical, but something more. "Come with me," he said softly, his hand slipping into hers. Lana hesitated for just a moment, her mind buzzing with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. Gabriel was pulling her into something deeper, something she didn't fully understand. But she knew, deep down, that she wanted to follow him, no matter where it led. She nodded silently and let him lead her deeper into the warehouse. The space around them was vast and empty, the walls lined with old equipment and forgotten relics of the building's past. The dim light cast long shadows, giving the place an almost dreamlike quality. As they walked, Lana's heartbeat echoed in her ears, matching the steady rhythm of their footsteps. When they reached the far side of the warehouse, Gabriel stopped in front of an old metal door, its surface rusted and worn. He glanced back at her, his eyes still unreadable in the dim light, before pushing the door open with a soft creak. Inside was a small, private room. It was stark, almost utilitarian, with nothing but a small table and 2 chairs in the center. The walls were bare, the only light coming from a single hanging bulb that flickered faintly overhead. There was an odd intimacy to the space, as though it existed solely for this moment. Gabriel gestured for her to sit, his movements slow and deliberate. Lana lowered herself into the chair, her gaze never leaving his. She could feel the shift in energy between them, the way the air seemed to thrum with something unspoken. He took the seat across from her, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her pulse race. For a moment, they simply sat there, the silence stretching, thick and heavy with anticipation. Lana opened her mouth to speak, but Gabriel was faster. "You intrigue me, Lana," he said, his voice low and measured, each word carefully chosen. "From the moment I saw you at the gallery, I knew you were different." She blinked, surprised by the admission. "Different how?" Gabriel leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table, his gaze never wavering. "Most people in this city, in my world, they wear masks. They hide behind facades of wealth and power, playing games to get what they want. But you..." His lips twitched into a small smile. "You're not playing." Lana's breath caught in her throat, her fingers tightening around the edge of the chair. She wasn't sure how to respond. Gabriel was right, she wasn't like the others, the people who moved through life like actors on a stage. She preferred to be behind the camera, observing, capturing moments rather than being a part of them. But he wasn't done. "You see things," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, as though sharing a secret. "You see what others don't. And that's what drew me to you." Lana's heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing to process his words. It was unsettling, the way he spoke, as if he knew her better than she knew herself. And yet, there was something comforting in his understanding, in the way he saw her without judgment or pretense. "Why me?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why now?" Gabriel's smile faded, replaced by a more serious expression. "Because you're different. And I need someone who's different." Lana's stomach twisted with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. There was more to this, more to him. She could feel it in the way he looked at her, the way his words hinted at something deeper, something he wasn't telling her. "What do you mean?" she pressed, her voice steadier now, though her heart still raced. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving hers. "There's a lot about me that you don't know, Lana. Things that most people wouldn't understand." Her breath hitched at his words. The weight of what he was saying settled over her like a heavy blanket. She had known from the moment she met him that Gabriel wasn't like anyone else. He had an edge, a mystery that both drew her in and made her wary. "Then tell me," she said, her voice firmer now, her curiosity outweighing her fear. "I want to understand." Gabriel's eyes darkened, a flicker of something dangerous passing through them. He hesitated for a moment, as though weighing whether or not to share the truth. But then, with a slow exhale, he leaned forward again, his voice low and steady. "I deal with things, with people," he began, his words careful. "People who have power, influence. They come to me when they want something done that can't be handled through normal channels." Lana's stomach tightened, her mind racing to keep up. "Are you a criminal?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, and for a moment, she regretted asking. But Gabriel didn't flinch. "Not in the way you're thinking," he replied calmly. "I'm not part of some crime syndicate, if that's what you're wondering. But I do work in the shadows, making things happen for people who don't want their hands dirty." Lana's pulse quickened, her thoughts spinning. She had suspected that Gabriel wasn't entirely above board, but hearing it confirmed made her feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, teetering between safety and something far more dangerous. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Gabriel's gaze softened, though the intensity in his eyes remained. "Because I want you to know what you're getting into, Lana. I don't want to hide things from you." Her heart skipped a beat. There was an honesty in his words, a vulnerability she hadn't expected. He was offering her a choice, she realized. A chance to walk away before things got more complicated. But even as her mind screamed at her to run, her heart pulled her in the opposite direction. Lana looked down at her hands, her thoughts swirling. She had always been the one on the outside, observing life from a distance. But Gabriel was pulling her into his world, a world that was darker and more dangerous than anything she had ever known. And yet, despite the risks, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was where she was supposed to be. When she looked back up at him, her decision was clear. "I'm not afraid," she said softly, her voice steady. Gabriel's eyes widened slightly, surprise flickering across his face before it was replaced by something warmer, something that looked almost like relief. "Good," he murmured, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Because this is only the beginning." A new understanding after their conversation, Gabriel's demeanor shifted slightly. The tension between them remained, but there was something new in the way he looked at her now, something softer, more open. Lana could feel the shift in herself too. She wasn't just intrigued by Gabriel anymore. She was invested. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversation, each word drawing them closer, each glance igniting a new spark between them. Gabriel shared more about his life, about the dangerous world he navigated, and Lana found herself hanging on every word. There was something thrilling about the way he lived, the risks he took, the power he wielded in the shadows. But there was also something deeply vulnerable about him, a part of himself that he only seemed to show when they were alone. By the time the night ended, Lana felt like she had crossed a line she could never uncross. But instead of fear, all she felt was excitement. Whatever this was, whatever they were, it was real. And she wasn't going to walk away. Not now. Not ever. As they stood outside the warehouse, the cool night air brushing against her skin, Gabriel reached for her hand. His touch was warm, grounding, and when he looked down at her, there was a new kind of intensity in his eyes. "You're with me now," he said softly, his voice filled with quiet conviction. Lana nodded, her pulse quickening at the weight of his words. "I'm with you," she whispered. And she knew, deep down, that she meant it. Part 5, The Turning Point. The days that followed felt like a blur to Lana, a whirlwind of emotions she couldn't quite control. After the night at the warehouse, she and Gabriel grew closer in ways she hadn't anticipated. Their connection wasn't just physical, though the pull between them was undeniable. It was deeper, more intense, a gravitational force that kept drawing her back to him. Lana found herself craving his presence. She thought of him at odd moments, during mundane tasks like editing photos or walking through the city. She would replay their conversations in her head, dissecting every word, every glance, every touch. And each time, she found herself wanting more. But with that desire came something else, a creeping sense of uncertainty. She had plunged headfirst into this relationship with Gabriel, barely knowing anything about him or the life he led. She wasn't blind to the danger that surrounded him, nor the secrets he still kept hidden. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to walk away. She wasn't sure if it was love or obsession, but whatever it was, it consumed her. One evening, about a week after the warehouse encounter, Gabriel invited her to his apartment for the first time. Lana wasn't sure what to expect, but as she stood outside the sleek, modern building in one of the city's wealthier neighborhoods, her pulse quickened with anticipation. When Gabriel answered the door, she felt the same rush she always did when she saw him, like the world shifted just slightly, bringing him into sharper focus. He was dressed casually tonight, in dark jeans and a fitted black sweater, but he still exuded that same effortless confidence. "You made it," he said with a smile, stepping aside to let her in. Lana nodded, her heart racing as she stepped into his apartment. It was everything she had imagined it would be: stylish, minimalist, and yet undeniably masculine. The walls were a cool shade of gray, and the furniture was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the city skyline. There were no personal touches, no family photos or mementos. The space was as guarded as the man who lived in it. "It's beautiful," Lana said, her voice soft as she took in the surroundings. Gabriel's eyes flicked to hers, a small smile playing on his lips. "Thanks. It's not much, but it works for me." Lana moved toward the large window, her eyes drawn to the glittering lights of the city below. It was strange, being here, in this space that felt so intimately tied to Gabriel's world. She could sense the power he wielded, the control he had over his environment. And yet, standing here with him, she felt like she was seeing another side of him, one that wasn't wrapped in mystery or danger. "It's so quiet," she murmured, her fingers brushing the cool glass. "Almost too quiet." Gabriel moved to stand beside her, his gaze fixed on the cityscape. "It's a different kind of quiet up here," he said, his voice low. "A quiet where you can hear yourself think." Lana turned to look at him, her pulse quickening at the sight of him so close. There was a weight in his words, a subtle vulnerability that he rarely let show. It reminded her that, despite his exterior, Gabriel was still a man who carried the weight of whatever secrets he kept. "You must think about a lot," she said softly, her eyes searching his. Gabriel's lips twitched, but his gaze remained on the city. "More than I'd like sometimes." A heavy silence fell between them, the air thick with the tension of unspoken words. Lana wanted to ask him what those thoughts were, what haunted him when the world fell silent, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to know. Instead, she reached out, placing a hand on his arm, grounding herself in the warmth of his skin. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Gabriel finally turned to her, his dark eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, the intensity between them was overwhelming, the weight of everything left unsaid hanging in the air. But then he reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch sending a familiar shiver through her body. "I know," he murmured, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "That's why you're different." Lana's heart skipped a beat at his words, her breath catching in her throat. There it was again, that feeling of being seen, of being understood in a way she hadn't expected. And in that moment, all the doubts, all the uncertainty, faded into the background. Without another word, Gabriel leaned down, his lips capturing hers in a slow, deliberate kiss. Lana melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck as she let herself get lost in the warmth of his embrace. It was different this time, slower, more tender. There was no rush, no urgency. Just the quiet, intimate connection that had been building between them from the start. When they finally pulled apart, Gabriel's forehead rested against hers, their breaths mingling in the quiet of the room. "I don't want to hurt you, Lana," he whispered, his voice raw and honest. Lana's chest tightened at his words, her mind racing with the weight of what he was saying. She knew there were risks, knew that being with Gabriel meant stepping into a world she didn't fully understand. But she also knew that, despite everything, she wanted to be with him. "You won't," she whispered back, her voice steady. Gabriel's eyes searched hers for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether or not to believe her. Then, with a slow exhale, he pulled her into his arms again, holding her close as they stood in the quiet of his apartment. For the rest of the night, they stayed like that, wrapped in each other's arms, the world outside fading into the background. Lana knew that things would only get more complicated from here, that Gabriel's world was one filled with shadows and danger. But for now, in this moment, she was content to just be with him. A new challenge. The next few weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and quiet nights. Lana and Gabriel settled into a rhythm, their relationship growing stronger with each passing day. But even as they grew closer, Lana could sense the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Gabriel was more careful now, more guarded. He didn't share as much about his work, and there were nights when he would disappear for hours, leaving Lana alone with her thoughts. She tried not to ask too many questions, tried to respect the boundaries he had set, but it wasn't easy. The more time they spent together, the more Lana wanted to know. She wanted to understand the world he lived in, the choices he made. But each time she got close, Gabriel would pull back, retreating into the shadows of his own mind. One night, after a particularly long day at work, Lana found herself pacing her apartment, her mind buzzing with thoughts of Gabriel. He hadn't called, hadn't texted, and for the first time since they'd met, she felt a flicker of doubt. Was she getting too close? Was she pushing him away by wanting more? Just as she was about to reach for her phone to text him, there was a knock at her door. Lana's heart skipped a beat as she rushed to open it, her mind racing with the possibility that it was Gabriel. But when she opened the door, her stomach dropped. It wasn't Gabriel. It was a man she didn't recognize, tall, broad-shouldered, with a hardened expression that sent a jolt of fear through her. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his dark eyes cold and calculating as they swept over her. "Lana, right?" he asked, his voice deep and commanding. Lana's mouth went dry. "Who are you?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm a friend of Gabriel's. We need to talk." Part 6, Shadows of the Past. Lana's heart raced as the man at her door stared down at her, his presence unsettling and far too intense. He didn't belong here, this wasn't part of her world, and neither was the sudden feeling of dread that settled over her. Everything in her body screamed for her to shut the door, to run, but she stood frozen, her mind trying to make sense of the situation. The man's dark eyes glinted as he stepped forward, his size dominating the small space of the entryway. "You're not going to invite me in?" he asked, his voice smooth but laced with something darker. Lana swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the edge of the door. "I don't know who you are," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "And I'm not in the habit of letting strangers into my apartment." The man's smile widened, but it didn't ease the tension in his face. "I'm not a stranger. I told you, I'm a friend of Gabriel's." Lana's pulse quickened at the mention of Gabriel's name. This man wasn't here by accident, and he wasn't here to deliver good news. She had no idea who he was or what he wanted, but she knew enough to be wary. "I'll call Gabriel," she said, taking a step back, her mind racing for an escape route. "If he vouches for you, maybe we can talk." The man's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of impatience crossing his face. "There's no need for that. Gabriel knows I'm here. In fact, he sent me." Lana's stomach twisted. Gabriel had sent him. Why? Nothing about this felt right, and the longer she stood there, the more her instinct screamed that she needed to get out of this situation. She nodded toward the hallway. "Fine. We can talk, but not here. Let's go somewhere public." The man raised an eyebrow, his amusement evident, but he didn't argue. "Lead the way." With her heart still pounding in her chest, Lana grabbed her coat and her phone, slipping it into her pocket as she motioned for the man to follow her. She didn't like this, not one bit, but she knew she couldn't handle this alone. If Gabriel had really sent him, she needed to know why. They walked in silence, the cold night air biting at Lana's skin as they headed toward a small cafe a few blocks away. It was late, but the cafe was still open, its warm lights spilling out onto the street, a welcome contrast to the chill of the night. She pushed open the door, the bell above it chiming softly as they stepped inside. The man followed her to a table in the back, his gaze never leaving her. He moved with an unsettling calm, as though nothing fazed him. But it was his eyes that unnerved her the most. There was something cold and calculating in them, something that reminded her of Gabriel, but darker, more dangerous. As they sat down, Lana's fingers trembled slightly as she pulled out her phone. She needed answers, and she wasn't going to wait for them. "I'm calling Gabriel," she said firmly, her voice louder than she intended. The man leaned back in his chair, a small, amused smile on his lips. "Go ahead. Call him." Lana quickly dialed Gabriel's number, her heart pounding as she waited for him to answer. After what felt like an eternity, the line clicked, and his familiar voice came through the speaker. "Lana." Relief flooded her, but it was quickly overshadowed by the tension in the air. "Gabriel, there's a man here. He says he's your friend. Is that true?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Lana wasn't sure if Gabriel was going to answer. But then his voice returned, calm but with an edge of something she couldn't quite place. "His name is Marcus." "He's not a friend," Gabriel said slowly. "He's someone I do business with." Lana's blood ran cold. Business. Of course. She should have known that Gabriel's world would eventually bleed into hers. And now it had, in the form of this man who sat across from her, watching her every move with unsettling intensity. "I don't understand," she whispered into the phone, her voice trembling. "Why is he here? What does he want?" Gabriel's silence stretched for a moment longer, and when he finally spoke, his words were measured and careful. "Marcus and I have a complicated arrangement. He shouldn't be bothering you, Lana. I'm going to fix this. But you need to be careful." Lana's heart pounded in her chest, her gaze flickering to Marcus, who sat calmly, as if he could hear every word of her conversation. "What does he want from me?" Gabriel's voice dropped, low and tense. "He's trying to get to me, Lana. By going through you." Lana's stomach twisted in knots. She hadn't expected to be caught in the middle of something like this. Whatever Gabriel was involved in, it was bigger and more dangerous than she had realized. And now, she was a pawn in a game she didn't understand. "I'm coming to get you," Gabriel said, his voice firm. "Don't go anywhere. Stay in the cafe. I'll be there soon." The line went dead, and Lana lowered the phone, her heart racing as she met Marcus's gaze. He hadn't moved, hadn't shown any sign of impatience or anger. He simply waited, like a predator watching its prey. "What did Gabriel say?" Marcus asked, his voice deceptively calm. Lana swallowed hard, trying to keep her composure. "He's on his way. Whatever this is, you should talk to him." Marcus's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, we'll talk. Don't worry." The minutes dragged on as they sat in the cafe, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. Lana's mind raced with questions, but she knew better than to ask. Whatever was happening, she was in over her head, and the only person who could pull her out was Gabriel. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door to the cafe swung open, and Gabriel walked in. His face was set in a hard expression, his eyes narrowing the moment he saw Marcus sitting across from Lana. Without a word, Gabriel crossed the room, his presence commanding intense. He didn't sit down. Instead, he stood beside Lana, his eyes locked on Marcus. "You're out of line, Marcus," Gabriel said, his voice cold and steady. "This has nothing to do with her." Marcus raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair as if the entire situation amused him. "It has everything to do with her, Gabriel. She's part of your life now, isn't she? That makes her relevant." Gabriel's jaw tightened, his hand resting on the back of Lana's chair as if to shield her from whatever threat Marcus posed. "This is between you and me. Leave her out of it." Marcus chuckled, but there was no warmth in the sound. "I think you're forgetting how this works. You don't get to pick and choose the pieces on the board." Lana's pulse quickened, fear gnawing at the edges of her mind. She could feel the weight of Gabriel's tension beside her, the silent war happening between him and Marcus. Whatever this was, it went far deeper than she had imagined, and she was caught in the crossfire. "I'm warning you," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "Leave her alone. Or I'll make sure you regret it." For the first time, Marcus's smile faltered, his eyes darkening as he straightened in his chair. The air between them crackled with unspoken threats, and Lana could sense just how dangerous this situation had become. But then, just as quickly as the tension had flared, Marcus's smile returned, though it didn't reach his eyes. He stood slowly, his gaze sweeping over Lana one last time before he turned his attention back to Gabriel. "You're playing a dangerous game, Gabriel," Marcus said quietly, his voice low and menacing. "Don't forget that." Without another word, Marcus turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving a trail of tension in his wake. Lana exhaled a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, her heart still pounding in her chest. She looked up at Gabriel, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. "What the hell was that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Gabriel didn't answer immediately. His eyes were still locked on the door Marcus had just walked through, his expression hard and unreadable. After a long moment, he finally turned to her, his gaze softening as he reached for her hand. "I'm sorry, Lana," he said quietly, his voice filled with regret. "I didn't want this for you." Lana swallowed hard, her mind spinning. She had known that being with Gabriel meant stepping into a world she didn't fully understand, but this was more than she had bargained for. I need to know, Gabriel, she said, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. What's really going on? Gabriel hesitated for a moment, his hand tightening around hers. I'll tell you everything, he said softly. But not here. Not now. Lana nodded, her heart still racing, but she knew that she was already in too deep. Whatever Gabriel was hiding, whatever secrets his world held, she was a part of it now. And there was no turning back. Part 7, Together We Stand. The ride back to Gabriel's apartment was silent, but the tension between them was palpable. Lana sat in the passenger seat of Gabriel's car, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her mind racing with everything that had just happened. Marcus's visit had shaken her, and even though Gabriel had stepped in to protect her, she couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was lurking just beneath the surface. When they arrived at his apartment, Gabriel unlocked the door and gestured for her to step inside. The atmosphere felt different now, less like a safe haven and more like a place filled with questions. Lana hesitated for a moment, but she followed him in, her heart still pounding. Gabriel locked the door behind them and turned to face her. His dark eyes were filled with a mixture of regret and concern, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence hung heavy in the air, thick with unspoken words. Finally, Lana broke the silence. What's going on, Gabriel? Who is Marcus, and why is he targeting me? Gabriel ran a hand through his hair, his jaw clenched as he searched for the right words. Marcus is someone I used to do business with. A long time ago. He's dangerous. More dangerous than I'd like to admit. Lana's heart skipped a beat at the admission. She had known Gabriel was involved in something shady, but hearing him say it aloud made it feel more real. What kind of business? She asked, her voice quiet but firm. Gabriel sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly as if the weight of his past was pressing down on him. I don't expect you to understand, Lana. But I wasn't always this. He gestured to himself, his eyes darkening with old memories. I got involved with the wrong people. Made choices I regret. And now those choices are coming back to haunt me. Lana swallowed hard, her mind racing. And Marcus? He wants something from you. Gabriel nodded, his expression grim. Marcus and I had an agreement, but things went south. Now he thinks I owe him, and he's using you to get to me. The words hit Lana like a punch to the gut. She had become collateral in Gabriel's dangerous world, a pawn in a game she didn't understand. I don't want to be used, Gabriel, she said, her voice shaking. I didn't sign up for this. Gabriel's eyes softened as he stepped closer, reaching out to take her hand. I know. And I'm sorry. I never wanted to drag you into this. But I promise you, I'll protect you. I won't let Marcus hurt you. Lana searched his face, her heart torn between fear and the undeniable connection she felt with him. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that he could keep her safe. But there was a part of her that wondered if she had already gone too far, if it was too late to turn back. I need you to be honest with me, she whispered, her voice trembling. I need to know what I'm dealing with. Gabriel hesitated for a moment, his hand tightening around hers. I can't tell you everything, he said softly, his voice filled with regret. But I will tell you this, my past is messy. I've done things I'm not proud of. Things that haunt me. And Marcus, he's a reminder of that. Lana's chest tightened, her mind swirling with questions. She had never imagined that Gabriel's world was this dangerous, that his past was filled with such darkness. But despite the fear, there was a part of her that couldn't walk away. Not yet. Can you fix this? She asked quietly. Can you make him go away? Gabriel's jaw clenched, his eyes darkening with determination. I will. I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe, Lana. I promise. Lana wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that he could protect her from whatever storm was brewing on the horizon. But as she stood there, staring into his eyes, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. A deeper dive the following days passed in a haze of tension and uncertainty. Gabriel had been working tirelessly to keep Marcus at bay, but Lana could sense the toll it was taking on him. He was more guarded now, more distant, and the darkness that clung to him seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Lana, too, found herself slipping further into a world she didn't fully understand. She was more cautious, more aware of her surroundings, constantly looking over her shoulder for any sign of danger. Her life had been turned upside down, and the carefree existence she had known before Gabriel now felt like a distant memory. One night, after another long day of uncertainty, Gabriel called her. Can you meet me at the warehouse? He asked, his voice low and tense. Lana's heart skipped a beat. The warehouse. The place where everything between them had shifted. She hadn't been back there since that night, and the thought of returning filled her with a mix of excitement and dread. Why there? She asked, her voice shaky. Because it's the only place I know Marcus won't follow, Gabriel replied. I need to talk to you. I need you to trust me. The desperation in his voice sent a shiver down Lana's spine. She had never heard him sound like this, so vulnerable, so raw. And despite the fear that gnawed at her, she couldn't say no. I'll be there, she whispered. The warehouse was just as she remembered it, dark, empty, and filled with an eerie sense of isolation. As she stepped inside, the cool air brushing against her skin, she spotted Gabriel standing in the center of the room, his back to her. Gabriel, she called softly. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his eyes, a mix of regret and determination, that made her pulse quicken. I've made a decision, he said, his voice steady but tense. I'm going to take care of Marcus. For good. Lana's heart pounded in her chest. What do you mean? How? Gabriel's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening. It doesn't matter how. All that matters is that I'm going to end this. I'm going to make sure Marcus never comes near you again. The weight of his words hit her like a punch to the gut. She knew what he was saying, even if he didn't say it outright. Gabriel was prepared to do whatever it took to protect her, even if it meant crossing a line he couldn't come back from. Gabriel, Lana whispered, her voice trembling. You can't, I have to, he interrupted, his voice firm. You don't understand, Lana. Marcus won't stop. Not until he's destroyed everything I care about. And I can't let that happen. Tears stung the back of Lana's eyes as she stepped closer to him, her heart breaking for the man standing before her. Gabriel had always been a mystery to her, a dangerous, alluring force she couldn't resist. But now, standing here in the dim light of the warehouse, she saw him for what he truly was, a man willing to sacrifice everything for her. You don't have to do this alone, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. We can figure this out together. Gabriel's expression softened, and for a moment, the hard edges of his face melted away, revealing the vulnerability beneath. He reached out, cupping her face in his hands, his touch warm and comforting. "I can't drag you any deeper into this," he said softly, his voice filled with regret. "I've already put you in enough danger." Lana shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm already in it, Gabriel. I'm with you. No matter what." For a long moment, they stood there in silence, the weight of their unspoken fears pressing down on them. And in that moment, Lana knew that no matter what happened next, there was no turning back. She had made her choice, and that choice was Gabriel. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the world outside seemed to disappear. There was no going back now. They were in this together, for better or for worse. "I love you," Gabriel whispered against her hair, his voice barely audible. Lana's heart swelled with emotion, her chest tightening as the words washed over her. She hadn't expected to hear those words from him, hadn't expected to feel them so deeply in return. But as she stood there in his arms, she knew without a doubt that she felt the same. "I love you too," she whispered, her voice breaking with the weight of the truth. Gabriel's arms tightened around her, and for a moment, it felt like they were the only two people in the world. But deep down, Lana knew that the storm was still brewing. And soon, they would have to face it. Together. Part 8: The Confrontation. The days that followed Gabriel's decision felt like the calm before a storm. Lana knew that something was coming, something inevitable, but Gabriel remained tight-lipped about his plans. He had promised her that he would handle Marcus, that he would protect her, but the weight of that promise hung heavy between them. Lana couldn't shake the feeling that Gabriel was preparing for something dangerous. He moved with a certain focus, his attention sharper, his guard always up. There were times when he would disappear for hours without explanation, returning only to assure her that everything would be fine. But Lana knew better. Nothing about this situation was fine. One night, as they sat together in Gabriel's apartment, the tension between them palpable, Lana finally broke the silence. "You can't keep doing this, Gabriel. You can't keep shutting me out." Gabriel's jaw tightened, his eyes flickering with something she couldn't quite place: anger, frustration, maybe even fear. "I'm not shutting you out, Lana," he said quietly. "I'm trying to protect you." Lana shook her head, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "Protect me by keeping me in the dark. By disappearing without telling me where you're going or what you're doing. That's not protection, Gabriel. That's pushing me away." Gabriel's eyes darkened, and for a moment, she saw the full weight of the burden he was carrying. "I'm doing this for you," he said, his voice low but intense. "Everything I've done, everything I'm planning, is for you. To keep you safe." Lana's chest tightened as she searched his face, her heart aching with the knowledge that he was trying to carry this all on his own. She reached out, placing a hand on his arm, her voice softening. "But we're supposed to be in this together, remember? You don't have to do this alone." Gabriel's gaze softened, but the tension in his body remained. "I don't want you to get hurt," he whispered, his voice filled with raw emotion. Lana swallowed hard, her own emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "I'm already in this, Gabriel. I'm already a part of it. Keeping me in the dark doesn't protect me, it just makes it harder for me to help you." For a long moment, Gabriel didn't say anything. His eyes searched hers, as though trying to decide whether to let her in or continue shielding her from the truth. And then, with a slow exhale, he nodded. "Okay," he said quietly. "You're right. We're in this together." Lana's heart swelled with relief, but it was quickly tempered by the gravity of the situation. Whatever Gabriel was planning, whatever confrontation with Marcus was looming on the horizon, they would face it together. The plan over the next few days, Gabriel shared more details with Lana, slowly pulling back the curtain on his dangerous world. He told her about Marcus's connections, about the debts he had owed, and about the ways he had tried to break free from that life. It wasn't easy for Gabriel to open up. Lana could see the tension in his face every time he mentioned Marcus, the way his jaw clenched and his fists tightened. But for the first time, she felt like she was truly part of Gabriel's life. The plan was simple, but risky. Gabriel was going to confront Marcus once and for all, make it clear that he was done with whatever business they had shared in the past. He had connections of his own, people he could rely on to back him up, but the danger was real. Marcus wasn't the kind of man who walked away from a confrontation without a fight. "You don't need to be there," Gabriel had said one night as they discussed the details. "It's going to get ugly, Lana. I don't want you anywhere near it." Lana had shaken her head, her determination unwavering. "I'm not leaving you alone in this. I told you, we're in this together." Gabriel hadn't argued, but she could see the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to protect her, to shield her from the worst of it. But Lana wasn't willing to sit on the sidelines while Gabriel put himself in danger. Not anymore. The night of the confrontation arrived quicker than Lana had anticipated. Gabriel had arranged to meet Marcus in a secluded part of the city, a place where there would be no prying eyes, no interruptions. The weight of what was to come hung heavy in the air, and as they drove to the location, Lana could feel her heart pounding in her chest. Gabriel's hand rested on the steering wheel, his jaw set in a hard line. The silence between them was thick with anticipation, but Lana knew that this wasn't the time for words. She reached over, placing her hand over his, offering him silent support. He glanced at her, his eyes softening for just a moment before returning to the road ahead. When they arrived, Gabriel parked the car a short distance from the meeting spot, a rundown building on the outskirts of the city. The area was deserted, the streets empty and eerily quiet. Lana's stomach churned with nerves, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had made her choice, and now there was no turning back. As they approached the building, Gabriel's body tensed, his eyes scanning the area for any signs of Marcus or his men. The weight of the moment pressed down on them both, and Lana could feel her heart racing in her chest. They stepped inside the building, the air thick with dust and the scent of decay. The space was dimly lit, the only light coming from the few flickering bulbs overhead. Lana's pulse quickened as they moved further inside, her senses on high alert. And then, they heard it, the sound of footsteps echoing through the building. Marcus appeared from the shadows, his expression calm, but there was a dangerous glint in his eyes. He was flanked by two men, both of whom looked just as menacing as Marcus himself. The sight of them sent a chill down Lana's spine, but she stood her ground, her hand brushing against Gabriel's arm in silent support. "So, here we are," Marcus said, his voice smooth and unbothered. "Finally ready to settle things, Gabriel." Gabriel's eyes narrowed, his body tense with barely restrained anger. "This ends tonight, Marcus. I'm done with you. Done with all of this." Marcus chuckled, but there was no warmth in the sound. You think you can just walk away? After everything we've been through? After everything you owe me? Gabriel took a step forward, his voice cold and steady. I don't owe you anything. The tension in the room crackled like electricity, the unspoken threat hanging in the air. Lana could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her body on edge as she watched the confrontation unfold. She knew Gabriel was capable of handling himself, but the odds felt stacked against them. Marcus's smile faded, and his expression turned deadly serious. You're making a mistake, Gabriel. And mistakes have consequences. Gabriel's hand tightened into a fist, and for a moment, Lana thought he was going to lunge at Marcus. But instead, he took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. This is your last chance, Gabriel said, his voice low and dangerous. Walk away. Or I'll make sure you don't get another. The room fell into a tense silence, the air thick with the weight of unspoken violence. Marcus's eyes flickered to Lana, a sinister smile tugging at the corners of his lips. You really think she's worth all this trouble? Marcus asked, his voice dripping with mockery. Do you really think you can protect her? Lana's blood ran cold, and for a split second, fear gripped her heart. But she stood tall, refusing to back down. Gabriel's eyes darkened, and his voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You lay a hand on her, and I'll kill you. The words hung in the air like a threat, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Marcus's men shifted uncomfortably, but Marcus himself didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled. Let's see if you've got the guts, Marcus said softly. And then, all hell broke loose. Part 9. Chaos Unleashed. The atmosphere in the dimly lit warehouse shifted abruptly as Marcus's words echoed in the stillness, sending a chill down Lana's spine. She could feel the tension radiating from Gabriel, his muscles coiled tight as he prepared for the confrontation. Marcus's eyes glinted with something dark, a twisted delight at the unfolding chaos. You think you can scare me, Gabriel? You think you can protect her? He gestured to Lana, and she felt her stomach twist. What do you think she means to me? Nothing more than a distraction. Gabriel's expression hardened. You're wrong. She means everything. As the words left his lips, Lana felt a surge of emotions, fear, love, anger, all swirling inside her like a tempest. Gabriel's fierce protectiveness fueled her determination. She had chosen to stand by him, and now she wouldn't let him face Marcus alone. Gabriel, she said, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her heart. We can find a way out of this. We don't have to do this. Stay behind me, he instructed, his voice firm, but she could see the flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. He was trying to shield her, and yet, she refused to be a mere spectator in this fight. No, she replied, stepping forward, her resolve unwavering. I won't let you face this alone. We're in this together. Marcus's laughter filled the room, dark and mocking. Isn't that sweet? A love story amidst the chaos. But love won't save you, Gabriel. And it certainly won't save her. In an instant, the mood shifted again. The tension snapped, and without warning, one of Marcus's men lunged at Gabriel, fist swinging. Gabriel reacted instinctively, dodging the punch and countering with a quick jab to the man's gut. The sound of flesh meeting flesh echoed through the warehouse as the first blow was struck. Lana's heart raced as she watched the chaos unfold. Gabriel moved with a fluid grace, his training evident as he took on the first man while keeping an eye on Marcus. But there was no time for hesitation, she had to act. "Get back," she shouted to Gabriel, but her voice was drowned out by the scuffle. In the corner of her eye, she noticed the second man moving toward her, his expression predatory as he approached. Panic surged through her, but she pushed it down, forcing herself to think. She grabbed a nearby metal pipe from the ground, feeling the weight of it in her hands as she positioned herself defensively. "Lana, no!" Gabriel yelled, but she was already moving. With a surge of adrenaline, she swung the pipe at the approaching man, catching him off guard and knocking him off balance. He stumbled, and that moment of hesitation was all Gabriel needed to gain the upper hand against his opponent. "Stay close," Gabriel shouted as he took down the first man with a well-placed kick, but his eyes remained fixed on her, worry etched in his features. "I can handle this," she replied, her heart pounding in her chest as she prepared for the next attack. But just as she thought she had a moment of reprieve, Marcus stepped forward, his gaze cold and calculating. "You're brave, I'll give you that," he said, a sinister smile creeping onto his face. "But bravery has its price." Before she could react, Marcus lunged at her, but Gabriel was quicker. He intercepted Marcus, tackling him to the ground. They rolled together, grappling for control, the sound of their struggle echoing through the warehouse. Lana stood frozen for a moment, watching the fight unfold before her eyes. She could see the determination in Gabriel's movements, the way he fought with everything he had to protect her. And yet, the danger was palpable, the stakes higher than ever. "Get out of here, Lana," Gabriel shouted as he wrestled with Marcus. "Now!" "No! I won't leave you," she cried, gripping the pipe tighter, her knuckles white. She knew that leaving wasn't an option, she had to help him. Suddenly, Marcus managed to throw Gabriel off, regaining his footing with a swift kick. Gabriel stumbled but quickly regained his balance, his eyes locked on Marcus, filled with a mixture of fury and resolve. Lana took a deep breath, forcing herself to act. She moved closer, ready to strike again if necessary. "Gabriel," she called, hoping to draw his attention for just a moment. "Stay back," he shouted, but there was a pleading quality in his voice, a silent request for her safety. But before she could react, Marcus charged at Gabriel, and in that instant, Lana saw her chance. With all her strength, she swung the pipe toward Marcus, aiming for his back. The impact was solid, and Marcus stumbled forward, surprised by the blow. Gabriel seized the opportunity, tackling him to the ground once more, their bodies crashing to the floor with a thud. "Lana, go!" Gabriel shouted again, his voice hoarse with effort. But she couldn't move. She had come too far, fought too hard to turn back now. They were in this together, and she wouldn't abandon him. She stepped forward, ready to join the fight, her heart pounding in her chest. "Enough of this." Marcus growled, shoving Gabriel off him and rising to his feet, his expression a mask of rage. "You think you can take me on? You're nothing without your little girlfriend." Lana felt a surge of anger at Marcus's taunt, and she stepped up beside Gabriel, holding the pipe defiantly. "You don't know anything about us." Marcus's eyes narrowed, and a wicked smile spread across his face. "Then let's see how far your bravery gets you." In a sudden motion, he lunged toward them, but Gabriel was ready. He sidestepped and delivered a swift kick to Marcus's side, knocking the wind out of him. Lana's heart raced as she saw the moment of vulnerability in Marcus's stance. "Now!" Gabriel shouted, and Lana swung the pipe again, connecting with Marcus's shoulder. The impact sent him sprawling to the ground, but he quickly recovered, scrambling back to his feet with a snarl. "Enough!" Marcus roared, the fury in his eyes reaching a boiling point. "You think you can fight me? You're both fools." But Gabriel and Lana stood firm, side by side, their determination unwavering. They had each other, and together, they could face whatever danger lay ahead. With a fierce growl, Marcus charged once more, but this time, Gabriel was ready. He caught Marcus's attack, grappling with him as they fought for dominance, each man pushing against the other with sheer force. Lana moved in, ready to assist, but just as she did, she felt a sudden, sharp pain in her side. She turned to see one of Marcus's men, who had managed to recover, charging at her from the shadows. "Lana!" Gabriel shouted, his voice filled with urgency as he caught sight of the threat. In a split second, she pivoted, bringing the pipe up just in time to block the attack, but the force of the blow sent her stumbling back. She steadied herself, adrenaline pumping through her veins as she prepared for another strike. Gabriel was still engaged with Marcus, the two men locked in a brutal struggle as the chaos of the fight swirled around them. But all Lana could think about was the danger creeping closer, the very real threat that could take everything from her. With renewed determination, she swung the pipe once more, this time aiming directly at the man rushing toward her. The impact landed solidly, and the man faltered, giving Lana the chance to sidestep and avoid his attack. "Lana!" Gabriel shouted again, his voice laced with concern, but she was focused now. She had to fight, had to protect what mattered most. The sounds of fists connecting with flesh, grunts of effort, and the echoing chaos filled the air. The fight felt like it stretched on forever, time blurring as Lana found her rhythm, each strike fueled by adrenaline and the need to protect Gabriel. But as she fought, she could feel the tension building, the danger rising. She knew this couldn't last forever, something had to give. Finally, with a powerful blow, Gabriel sent Marcus crashing to the ground. He turned to Lana, his eyes blazing with intensity. "Are you okay?" Lana nodded, breathless but determined. "I'm fine. Let's finish this." As if summoned by their words, Marcus pushed himself up, fury radiating from him. "You think this is over?" he spat, wiping the blood from his mouth. "This is just the beginning." But Gabriel stepped forward, his expression hardening. "Not for you. You've messed with the wrong people, Marcus. This ends now." With that, Gabriel launched himself at Marcus once more, their bodies colliding in a fierce battle. Lana could feel the energy in the air, the raw power of their confrontation. She knew she had to stay strong, to stand by him, no matter what. And as the fight reached its peak, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Part 10: A New Beginning. The chaos of the fight reached a fever pitch as Gabriel and Lana battled against Marcus and his men, the air thick with tension and adrenaline. Gabriel moved with fierce determination, every strike aimed to protect Lana and end the threat Marcus posed once and for all. Lana fought alongside him, her heart pounding as she swung the pipe, striking with all her strength. She could feel the heat of the moment coursing through her veins, fueling her resolve. This was no longer just a fight for survival, it was a fight for their future. As Gabriel grappled with Marcus, the two men locked in a struggle for dominance. Lana noticed the second man attempting to flank them. Without hesitation, she turned and faced him, ready to defend what mattered most. "Stay away from him," she shouted, swinging the pipe with renewed vigor. The man charged at her, but she was ready. With a well-timed strike, she knocked him off balance, sending him crashing to the ground. The sound of the impact echoed through the warehouse, and for a brief moment, she felt a surge of triumph. But there was no time to celebrate. She turned back to see Gabriel still locked in combat with Marcus, their movements swift and dangerous. It was a brutal dance, each of them pushing against the other, neither willing to give an inch. "You think you can just walk away from me?" Marcus spat, his voice low and dangerous. "You're nothing without me, Gabriel. You always have been." Gabriel's expression hardened, his fists clenching as he found the strength to push Marcus back. "I'm done playing your games. This ends tonight." With one powerful shove, Gabriel sent Marcus staggering backward. But Marcus wasn't finished. He charged again, fueled by rage, determination in his eyes. Just as he lunged for Gabriel, Lana sprang into action. She positioned herself between them, raising the pipe high. "Gabriel, watch out," she shouted, ready to strike. In that moment, time seemed to slow. Gabriel's eyes widened as he saw her, and he instinctively stepped back, avoiding Marcus's reckless charge. The two collided, Marcus and Lana crashing together as they fought for control of the pipe. "Get away from her," Gabriel shouted, his voice filled with raw fury. Lana struggled against Marcus's strength, but she refused to back down. She couldn't let him win, not now. With a fierce cry, she twisted the pipe, breaking free from his grip and striking him across the side. The impact sent him reeling, giving Gabriel the opening he needed. Gabriel charged in, delivering a swift kick that sent Marcus sprawling to the ground. But he didn't stay down for long. Regaining his footing, he snarled at them both, fury etched across his face. "You think this is over?" he growled, his eyes dark with rage. "I'll make you both pay for this." Lana's heart raced, her instincts kicking into overdrive. "We need to end this, Gabriel. Now." With determination burning in his eyes, Gabriel nodded. Together. As they stood side by side, the realization washed over them. This wasn't just about fighting, it was about reclaiming their lives, about choosing to stand up for what mattered most. "Lana, on 3, Gabriel said, his voice steady. 1, 2, 3. With synchronized precision, they charged at Marcus together. The move took him by surprise, and before he could react, they tackled him to the ground, the force of their combined strength overwhelming him. Marcus struggled beneath them, but they held him down, their determination unyielding. "This ends now," Gabriel said firmly, his grip tightening as he pinned Marcus's arms. "You're making a mistake," Marcus hissed, his voice low and threatening. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Gabriel shot back, his voice filled with intensity. "And I'm not afraid of you anymore." With a swift motion, Gabriel pulled out his phone and dialed a number, his gaze still locked on Marcus. "I'm calling the police." "You're done here." Panic flickered in Marcus's eyes as he realized the gravity of the situation. "You can't do this," he shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. Gabriel pressed the phone to his ear, his expression unyielding. "You've made your choices, Marcus. And now you're going to face the consequences. The line connected, and Gabriel spoke into the phone, his voice steady as he reported the situation. Lana held her breath, adrenaline still pumping through her veins as they waited for the inevitable. "Help is on the way," Gabriel said, hanging up the phone and locking eyes with Lana. There was a sense of victory in his gaze, a shared understanding that they had fought together and won. But just as the relief began to settle, the door to the warehouse burst open. Flashing lights illuminated the space as police officers flooded inside, their shouts echoing through the building. "Get down!" "Hands in the air," one officer shouted, quickly assessing the situation. Lana and Gabriel released Marcus, standing together as the officers moved in, ready to take control. Marcus scrambled to his feet, his expression shifting from rage to fear as he realized he was cornered. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice filled with venom. "You think this is over? I'll be back." But before he could make a move, the officers moved in, swiftly restraining him and cuffing his hands behind his back. Lana felt a rush of relief wash over her as she watched them take him away, the threat finally neutralized. As the chaos began to settle, Gabriel turned to Lana, pulling her into his arms. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low and concerned. Lana nodded, her heart still racing as she buried her face against his shoulder. "I'm fine. Just a little shaken." He held her tightly, the warmth of his body grounding her as the reality of what they had just faced settled in. They had fought together, stood against a danger that had threatened to tear them apart, and they had come out the other side stronger. "I was so scared," Lana admitted, her voice muffled against him. Gabriel pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers. "You were amazing, Lana. You fought back. You didn't back down." A small smile tugged at her lips, but the weight of the moment still lingered. "We did this together," she said softly. He nodded, his expression serious. "I'll always have your back. No matter what." Just then, an officer approached them, a look of relief on his face. "Are you two all right?" he asked, glancing between them. "We're fine," Gabriel replied, his voice steady. "Just a bit shaken up." The officer nodded, relief evident in his features. "We'll take it from here. You've both done well. Thank you for your cooperation." As the officers began to escort Marcus out of the warehouse, Lana felt a sense of closure wash over her. This chapter was ending, and they were finally free from the shadow that had loomed over them for so long. As they stepped outside, the cool night air enveloped them, the city lights shining bright against the dark sky. Lana took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. They had faced the storm, and together, they had emerged stronger. "Where do we go from here?" Lana asked, looking up at Gabriel. He paused, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. "We move forward. Together." And in that moment, as they stood side by side under the vast night sky, Lana knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. They had fought for their love, for their future, and that was a battle worth winning.